The snowflakes fell like scattered whispers, each one a tiny, cold secret landing on the cracked asphalt of the Northwood Elementary playground. They clung to the bright crimson fabric of a small winter coat, a stark splash of color against the encroaching gray of the afternoon. 10-year-old Lily Peterson felt the sharp bite of ice through the thin fabric of her jeans, a cold that was nothing compared to the hot sting of humiliation burning her cheeks. A fist, surprisingly strong for its size, was tangled in her long brown hair, yanking her head back at an agonizing angle. Her world was a blur of muted sky, sneering faces, and the cruel, echoing sound of laughter. "What's the matter, Ghost?" Mark taunted, his breath puffing out in a white cloud. "Cat got your tongue?" His two loyal shadows, Kevin and Derek, chortled in agreement, their faces twisted into masks of childish cruelty. Lily's eyes, wide with terror and unshed tears, squeezed shut. No sound escaped her lips. There was never any sound. This was her curse, her defining characteristic in the brutal hierarchy of the 4th grade. She was Lily, the voiceless ghost. But another figure stood just beyond the chain-link fence, a silent, formidable witness to the scene. A magnificent German shepherd, his posture rigid, every muscle coiled with a disciplined tension that spoke of a life far removed from this suburban schoolyard. His amber eyes were not fixed on the falling snow, but on the small hand pulling Lily's hair. A low, almost inaudible rumble started deep in his chest, a vibration of contained power. On his side, barely visible beneath a dusting of snow, was a worn tactical vest, the faded letters spelling out a single powerful word: police. How had it come to this? How had a quiet girl who lived only for the silent comfort of her dog and a decorated hero who had faced down armed criminals ended up in this frozen, desperate tableau of childhood cruelty? To understand the weight of this moment, the deep chasm between the girl on the ground and the protector at the gate, one had to go back 3 weeks. 3 weeks earlier, the world of Northwood Elementary was simply a landscape of quiet dread for Lily Peterson. The hallways were canyons of noise, the cafeteria a roaring sea of judgment. Lily navigated it all with her head down, her gaze fixed on the scuffed tips of her worn sneakers. Her backpack, a faded pink monstrosity that seemed 2 sizes too big, was less a carrier of books and more a shell, a shield she could hunch behind to make herself smaller, less visible. The nickname, the voiceless ghost, had been a casual invention of Mark's at the beginning of the school year, but it had stuck with the brutal efficiency of a burr on a wool sweater. The other children didn't see a shy girl. They saw a void, a silence that made them uncomfortable, and their discomfort curdled into a casual daily torment. It was the small things, the 1,000 tiny cuts that bled her confidence dry. A foot stuck out in the lunch line, sending her tray clattering to the floor. Whispers that would erupt into laughter the moment she passed a huddle of girls by the lockers, her meticulously drawn art projects accidentally smudged by a passing elbow. Each incident was small enough to be dismissed by teachers as simple carelessness, but to Lily they were a constant, suffocating reminder of her own invisibility. She never fought back, never spoke up. She just absorbed it, the silence her only defense. If your heart aches for every child who has ever felt this small, this unseen, let us know by giving this story a thumbs up. The teachers saw a quiet, perhaps troubled student. They didn't see the war she was losing every single day. But then the final bell would ring, a sound of sweet, painful release, and Lily would begin the long walk home, her small shoulders slumped under the weight of her backpack and the heavier burden of her day. The moment she turned the corner onto her quiet, tree-lined street, however, a change would begin. Her steps would quicken, a flicker of light returning to her downcast eyes, because she knew who was waiting for her. From the front porch of her modest clapboard house, he watched. Shadow, she called him. He was old, his muzzle frosted with grey, and one of his ears was permanently torn, a jagged line that told a story she didn't fully understand. He would be lying down, his massive head resting on his paws, but his ears would be perked, scanning the street with a quiet vigilance. The instant he saw her small figure appear at the end of the block, his tail would begin to move, not a wild, happy wag, but a slow, steady thud, thud, thud against the wooden porch floor. It was a greeting, a signal, a silent declaration that said, "You are home. You are safe." I see you. Their bond was forged in a world without words. Shadow was the keeper of all her secrets, the furry shoulder she cried into when the cruelty of the day became too much to bear. He understood the language of her trembling hands, the meaning of a sigh that carried the weight of the world. He would nudge his cool nose into her palm, his intelligent, amber eyes holding hers with a depth of understanding that no human ever had. On his worn leather collar, nestled beside his name tag, was a small, faded metal medal. It was heavy, etched with numbers and letters she couldn't decipher, but she knew it was important. It felt like a piece of him, a part of the secret, silent strength he carried within his aging frame. It was a testament to a past life, as Kilo Police K9, badge number 3679, a life of sirens and service, of courage and confrontation. But to Lily, he was just Shadow, her steadfast protector, the one being in the entire universe who made her feel real. As autumn bled into the cold prelude to winter, the cruelty from Mark and his friends escalated. It was no longer enough to be invisible. They seemed determined to provoke a reaction, to shatter her silence. The taunts grew louder, more personal. One afternoon in the crowded cafeteria, Mark strode past her table and, with a deliberate flick of his wrist, sent her carton of milk splashing across her lunch, soaking the sandwich her mother had carefully made that morning. Laughter erupted around her. Lily just stared at the soggy mess, a lump forming in her throat so tight she could barely breathe. She carefully gathered her ruined lunch, dumped it in the trash, and sat through the rest of the period with an empty stomach, the gnawing hunger a dull ache that matched the one in her heart. At home that evening, she sat on the floor, her arms wrapped around Shadow's thick neck, burying her face in his fur. He didn't move, simply absorbed her silent sobs, his solid presence an anchor in her storm. He licked the tears from her cheek, a soft, rasping gesture of comfort. His gaze drifted to the window out toward the darkening street, and for a moment the soft, amber warmth in his eyes was replaced by something else. A flicker of the old Kilo, a protective instinct, honed over years of service that sensed the growing threat to his charge. He knew, with uncertainty that transcended human understanding, that the quiet war his girl was fighting was about to reach its breaking point. A line was about to be crossed, and he, the silent guardian, would be forced to step out of the shadows. The small clapboard house was the only place Lily Peterson's world made sense. Inside its quiet walls, the silence wasn't a void where insults could echo. It was a sanctuary, a warm blanket woven with the soft sounds of an old dog's breathing. After school, Lily would shed her heavy backpack, and with it, the suffocating weight of being the voiceless ghost. She would kneel on the worn floral rug in the living room, and Kilo would rise from his spot by the window, his movements stiff but deliberate, and rest his heavy head in her lap. His amber eyes, clouded with age but sharp with intelligence, would watch her with an unwavering focus that made her feel seen in a way no human ever had. Tonight, she traced the jagged line of the old wound on his left ear. It was a thick, silver scar, a permanent mark from a life she could only imagine. "Does it still hurt sometimes?" she whispered, her voice barely a breath in the still room. Kilo responded with a low rumble in his chest, a sound of pure contentment, and nudged her hand with his nose. His worn leather collar carried the faint, metallic scent of service, and on it hung the faded, nickel-sized medal. It was dull and scratched, but to Lily, it was more precious than any jewel. Badge number 3679. She would polish it sometimes with the soft hem of her t-shirt, imagining the stories etched into its surface. Stories of flashing lights, of urgent commands, of a city that needed a hero. She didn't know the details, only that Kilo had been one. Now his only mission was her. Their evenings followed a gentle rhythm. While her mother worked her second shift at the diner, Lily would do her homework at the kitchen table, Kilo lying faithfully at her feet, his tail giving a soft thump-thump against the linoleum whenever she shifted in her chair. He was her shadow, her confidant, her silent validator. When a math problem frustrated her to the point of tears, he would lift his head, his gaze a steady anchor in her sea of anxiety. He understood her unspoken language, the slump of her shoulders, the quickness of her breath, the way she would pick at the skin around her fingernails when the memories of the school day became too much. He never demanded words she couldn't find. His presence was enough. It was a profound, unspoken contract between a girl who felt invisible and a dog who saw everything. If you're starting to feel the warmth of their incredible bond, please give a like to show your support for Lily and Kilo. Their journey is just beginning. The next day at school, the fluorescent lights of the hallway seemed to hum with a special kind of cruelty. It was the day of the book report presentations, an event Lily dreaded more than any other. She had practiced her report on Charlotte's Web for Kilo the night before, her voice soft but steady as he listened, his ears twitching at the sound of her words. But in front of the classroom, her throat closed up. The 24 pairs of eyes felt like a physical weight pressing down on her. Mark Davies, sitting in the front row with a new sleek smartwatch on his wrist, leaned over to Kevin and whispered something. A snicker rippled through the front of the classroom. Lily's face burned hot, her carefully written notes trembling in her hands. She stammered through the first sentence, her voice a reedy squeak, and then the words simply vanished. She stood there, frozen, until Mrs. Davison gently told her she could sit down. The walk back to her desk was the longest journey of her life, each step followed by the stifled laughter that Mark had ignited. Mark wasn't just a bully, he was an institution at Northwood Elementary. His father was a prominent lawyer. His mother ran the PTA with an iron fist, and Mark moved through the school with an aura of untouchable entitlement. He wasn't bigger or stronger than the other boys, but he possessed a sharp, cruel intelligence for finding a person's deepest vulnerability and twisting it like a knife. He had seen Lily's silence not as shyness, but as a weakness to be exploited, a game to be played. He never seemed to face consequences. A quick, charming apology to a teacher, a promise to do better, and the slate was wiped clean, ready for the next day's torment. He lived in a world of second chances she had never been offered. That afternoon, during recess, Lily found a quiet corner by the old oak tree at the edge of the schoolyard. She pulled the small, hand-stitched puppy toy from her coat pocket. It was her most treasured possession, a gift from her grandmother before she had passed away. The toy, named Patches, was made of worn corduroy with mismatched button eyes and floppy ears. It had been her companion long before Kilo, a small, tangible piece of unconditional love she could carry with her. She was smoothing down its soft, frayed ear when a shadow fell over her. "What's that, ghost girl?" Mark's voice dripped with condescending amusement. Kevin and Derek flanked him, their expressions a mixture of eagerness and unease. Lily quickly tried to hide Patches back in her pocket, but Mark was faster. He snatched it from her grasp, his fingers brushing against hers with a cold, deliberate touch. He held it up between his thumb and forefinger as if it were a piece of garbage. "Oh, look, the baby still plays with dolls." Kevin laughed, a loud braying sound. Derek shifted his feet, looking away for a second before his eyes snapped back to Mark, not wanting to seem weak. Tears sprang to Lily's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She stood up, her small frame trembling, and held out her hand. "Please," she whispered, the word getting caught in her throat. "Give it back." Her plea only seemed to fuel Mark's cruelty. He looked at the toy, then back at Lily's desperate face, a slow, malicious smile spreading across his lips. "You want it?" he taunted, dangling it just out of her reach. "What's the magic word?" Lily just shook her head, the silent tears now tracing cold paths down her hot cheeks. She couldn't speak. She couldn't give him the satisfaction. Mark's smile vanished, replaced by a flash of anger. He hated being ignored. He hated that, even in her terror, she denied him the reaction he wanted. "Fine," he spat. He looked at Kevin and Derek. "Let's play a little game of catch." He tossed the toy to Kevin, who fumbled it before throwing it wildly to Derek. They were clumsy, their movements designed to mock her. Patches sailed through the air, a small, helpless form against the grey sky. Lily's heart pounded with each throw, a frantic, desperate bird trapped in her chest. She darted between them, her hands outstretched, trying to intercept the toy, but they just laughed and pushed her away. Then the game changed. Mark caught the toy one last time. He held it up, looking directly into Lily's tear-filled eyes. "Game over," he said, his voice flat and cold. With a deliberate, unhurried motion, he dropped Patches to the ground. He lifted his foot, clad in a brand-new, expensive sneaker, and brought it down hard on the toy's soft body. He twisted his heel, grinding it into the dirt. Once. Twice. A soundless scream ripped through Lily. She saw the button eye pop off and roll into a patch of damp leaves. She saw a seam split, a small puff of white stuffing escaping like a final breath. The act was so final, so needlessly destructive, that it seemed to suck all the air from the playground. Even Kevin and Derek fell silent, their mocking smiles gone, replaced by a flicker of shock. They had wanted to humiliate her, but this felt different, darker. Mark lifted his foot and kicked the ruined toy into a muddy puddle near the fence. He looked at Lily, a triumphant sneer back on his face. "Next time," he said, his voice low, "use your words." Then he and his friends walked away, their laughter starting up again, more forced this time, as they disappeared back toward the main building. Lily stood frozen for a long moment before she sank to her knees in the cold, damp grass. She reached into the muddy water and pulled out what was left of Patches. It was limp and soiled, its form broken. She clutched it to her chest, the sobs she had held back for so long finally breaking free in ragged, hiccuping gasps that shook her entire body. She had lost more than a toy. A piece of her grandmother's memory, a symbol of her private world, had been violated and destroyed in public. The bell rang, signaling the end of recess, but she didn't move. In that moment, surrounded by the vast emptiness of the schoolyard, Lily Peterson felt more voiceless, more broken, and more alone than ever before. But back at the small clapboard house, a pair of intelligent amber eyes stared out the front window, waiting. The old dog could not see what had happened, but as the minutes ticked by and the school bus failed to bring her home on time, a low, anxious whine began to build deep in his chest. Kilo knew. He could feel his girl's pain across the distance, a silent alarm ringing in his soul, awakening the instincts of a protector who had been dormant for far too long. The storm began not in the sky, but in the heart of a 10-year-old girl. That morning, the world outside Lily's window was a wash of monochrome grey, the clouds hanging low and heavy, as if the sky itself was holding its breath. Inside, a different kind of pressure was building. Kilo, her steadfast shadow, seemed to sense it. He didn't greet her with his usual soft thump of the tail against the floorboards. Instead, he rose and nudged his great head under her small hand, his body rigid, a low, almost inaudible rumble vibrating in his deep chest. His amber eyes, usually so soft and reassuring, held a sharp, vigilant gleam she hadn't seen in a long time. It was the look of Kilo, the canine officer, not Shadow, the companion. Lily stroked his scarred ear, trying to soothe the unease she felt radiating from him, an unease that mirrored the tightening knot in her own stomach. "It's okay, boy," she whispered, her voice a thin thread in the quiet house. "It's just school." But Kilo did not relax. He followed her to the door, his presence a solid, warm weight against her leg, a silent plea for her to stay within the safe walls of their small home. As she stepped onto the porch, the air was cold and damp, carrying the metallic scent of impending rain. Kilo watched from the doorway, not moving until the yellow school bus had swallowed her whole and rumbled away down the street. Only then did he retreat, a single low whine escaping his throat. At Northwood Elementary, the grey light filtering through the tall classroom windows did nothing to lift the oppressive atmosphere. For Lily, every hallway was a gauntlet, every open space a potential trap. She moved with practiced invisibility, her shoulders hunched, her gaze locked on the scuffed toes of her shoes. But today their eyes were on her. She felt the weight of their stares like a physical touch. In the lunch line, Mark, flanked by Kevin and Derek, deliberately let the gap in front of him grow, forcing her to stand isolated. Mark didn't say a word. He just smirked, a slow, cruel curve of his lips that promised something far worse than the usual whispered insults. Kevin nudged Derek, and the two of them snickered, a sound that made the back of Lily's neck prickle with cold dread. The rain began just after noon, a miserable, persistent drizzle that smeared the windows and turned the playground into a slick, grey expanse of asphalt and mud. Inside, the hours crawled by. During history class, Lily could feel Mark's eyes boring into her from 2 rows back. She risked a glance over her shoulder and saw him holding something up for Kevin and Derek to see, a small, crudely drawn caricature of a girl with a huge backpack and no mouth. The three of them shook with silent, mocking laughter. Lily's face burned with shame, and she snapped her head forward, focusing intently on the textbook in front of her, the words blurring into meaningless shapes. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She just had to make it to the final bell. Just a few more hours. But Kylo, miles away, knew. The old dog paced restlessly from the living room window to the front door, his claws making soft clicking sounds on the hardwood floor. The rain tapping against the glass seemed to agitate him. He would stop, his head cocked, his torn ear twitching, as if listening for a sound only he could hear. The faint, distant echo of his girl's fear. A car would backfire down the street, and every muscle in his body would tense, his body dropping into the low, coiled stance of a protector about to face a threat. He was a guardian without his ward, a weapon of loyalty and love with no target for his devotion, and the feeling of helplessness was a torment. When the final bell shrieked through the halls of Northwood Elementary, its shrill cry was a starting pistol for Lily's escape. She usually waited, letting the flood of students pass, but not today. Today, she bolted. Shoving her books into her backpack with trembling hands, she planned a new route, one that would take her out the side exit near the gymnasium, a longer path to the bus loop, but one that just might be clear. She slipped into the stream of departing students, trying to use the chaos as camouflage. For a moment, she thought she had made it. The side hallway was nearly empty. She pushed open the heavy steel door and stepped out into the biting, damp air. The drizzle had intensified, morphing into a wet, heavy sleet that was already beginning to coat the ground in a treacherous, slushy film. She pulled the hood of her red coat over her head and began to hurry toward the distant line of yellow buses. "Going somewhere, Ghost?" Mark's voice cut through the sound of the rain. Lily froze, her blood turning to ice. She turned slowly. He was standing at the corner of the building, and he wasn't alone. Kevin and Derek emerged from behind him, their expressions a mixture of excitement and malice. They had anticipated her move. They had cut her off. There was nowhere to run. "We just want to see your little toy," Mark said, his voice deceptively calm as they began to walk toward her, fanning out to block any path of retreat. "The one you're always hiding." Lily clutched her backpack tighter. The hand-stitched puppy her grandmother had made for her was inside, nestled safely in a side pocket. It was her only comfort, her one tangible link to a feeling of safety. "Leave me alone," she managed to say, but the words were a puff of white vapor in the cold air, instantly stolen by the wind. The pursuit was slow, almost theatrical. As Lily backed away, they advanced step for step. The sleet was turning into thick, wet snowflakes now, clinging to her coat, melting on her eyelashes. The schoolyard, moments ago a cacophony of shouting children and rumbling engines, was now eerily silent. The last of the buses pulled away, its red taillights disappearing into the swirling grey. She was completely, utterly alone with them. They cornered her against the cold, diamond-patterned steel of the bike racks. The chain-link fence felt like the bars of a cage at her back. "Nowhere left to go, Lily," Derek taunted, his voice giddy. Mark stepped forward, his face just inches from hers. "Give me the backpack." When she didn't move, just shaking her head, tears welling in her eyes, his face hardened. With a sudden, vicious movement, he wrenched the backpack from her shoulders. The force of it sent her stumbling sideways. Kevin grabbed it and unzipped the side pocket, pulling out the small, worn puppy toy. "Look at this," Kevin crowed, holding it up. "She still plays with baby dolls." Mark snatched it from his hand. "Such a baby," he sneered, dangling it in front of Lily's tear-streaked face. Her breath hitched in a silent sob, her small hands reaching for it in a desperate, futile gesture. This was it, the culmination of weeks of torment, the final, crushing act of humiliation. He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound in the snow-muffled quiet. Then, with a casual flick of his wrist, he tossed her precious toy. It landed with a soft, sickening plop in a muddy puddle of melted snow and grime. A wave of pure anguish washed over Lily. It was more than just a toy. It was a piece of her heart, now sullied and abandoned in the dirt. The sight broke something inside her, but before a sound could even escape her lips, Mark took another step forward. His expression was one of cruel triumph. He shoved her hard against the chain-link fence. The metal links bit sharply into her back through the fabric of her coat. The impact jarred her entire body, knocking the wind from her lungs. The world tilted, and she crumpled to the ground, her knees hitting the cold, wet asphalt. The boys erupted in laughter, the sound echoing in the empty yard, a triumphant, brutal chorus celebrating her defeat as the heavy, wet snowflakes began to fall faster, blanketing the scene in a cold, white silence. The cruel laughter, sharp and ugly, hung in the frigid air for a split second before it was sliced in half by a sound that did not belong in a schoolyard. It was a low, guttural growl, a vibration that seemed to emanate from the very earth beneath their feet. It was ancient and deep, the sound of controlled power, of a final warning before the unleashing of something terrible. Mark's raised fist, poised to shove Lily again, froze mid-air. Kevin and Derek, who had been tossing the little puppy toy between them, dropped it into the slush, their smirks vanishing as if wiped clean. They all turned, their heads snapping in unison toward the main gate. There, a shadow detached itself from the gloom of the snow-swept afternoon. It was Kilo. He moved with a liquid grace that belied his size, his body held low to the ground, every muscle coiled with a terrifying purpose. His amber eyes, usually so soft when they looked at Lily, were now chips of hard, polished stone, fixed on the three boys with an intensity that burned. He didn't bark, he didn't snarl. The growl was enough. It was a promise. Mark, his face pale, took an involuntary step back. Where did that thing come from? Kilo ignored him, his focus absolute. With a speed that was shocking, he closed the distance, not in a frantic charge, but in a measured, deliberate advance that was infinitely more menacing. He didn't lunge for Mark. He didn't snap at Kevin or Derek. Instead, with the precision of a trained operative, he inserted himself between Lily's small, crumpled form and the boys. He stood over her, a living shield of muscle and fur, his scarred ear a testament to old battles, the faded police vest a stark contrast to the falling snow. The faint glint of the worn metal medal swinging from his collar caught the grey light. He simply stood there, a silent, unmovable guardian, his presence shifting the balance of power on the playground so completely it was as if the world had tilted on its axis. The sudden, unnerving silence was broken by the squeak of a side door. Mrs. Davison, the third-grade teacher, poked her head out. "What's all the— Oh my God!" Her hand flew to her mouth. Her shout brought others running, Mr. Gable, the gym teacher, and then, with a face etched in concern, Principal Thompson. Their initial reactions were exactly what one would expect. They saw three frightened boys, a little girl on the ground, and a very large, very serious-looking German shepherd standing over her. "A stray!" Mr. Gable yelled, instinctively moving to put himself in front of the students. "Someone call animal control! Get away from the dog, kids! Hey, it's a dangerous animal!" Mrs. Davison shrieked, her voice thin with panic. "Get that beast away from the children!" Lily, still shaking on the cold ground, looked up. She saw the fear in their eyes, the misunderstanding. She saw her protector, her only friend, being misjudged. She tried to speak, to tell them, He's not." But her voice was a tiny squeak, a mouse's plea in a hurricane of adult panic, immediately swallowed by the escalating chaos. Principal Thompson was already on his phone, his voice urgent and strained. The situation detonated with the arrival of a sleek black SUV that screeched to a halt at the curb. Mr. and Mrs. Davies, Mark's parents, burst out of the vehicle, their faces thunderous. They had clearly been called by their son, who now ran to them, his earlier bravado replaced by a theatrical display of terror. "Mom, Dad, that dog attacked us!" Mark cried, pointing a trembling finger at Kilo. "It came out of nowhere. It belongs to her." He jabbed his finger toward Lily. Mrs. Davies, a woman dressed in an expensive coat that seemed immune to the snow, marched onto the school grounds, her high heels sinking slightly into the soft turf. "What is the meaning of this, Principal Thompson? You allow vicious animals on school property? My son could have been mauled." "We're handling it, Mrs. Davies," Principal Thompson said, trying to project an authority he clearly did not feel. "The dog will be removed." "Removed? It should be put down," Mr. Davies boomed, his voice dripping with entitlement. He glared down at Lily, who flinched under his gaze. "And you," he said, his voice laced with contempt. "You bring a dangerous animal here? You will be hearing from our lawyer. This school will be hearing from our lawyer." Lily's world was spinning. The injustice was a physical weight pressing the air from her lungs. She looked at Kilo, who had not moved, had not flinched. He remained her stoic shield, his gaze unwavering, his body a silent testament to a loyalty these people could not comprehend. She tried again, pushing herself up on one elbow. "He was protecting me," she whispered, the words lost in the wind. It was then that another figure emerged from the side door of the school, a man whose presence was usually as quiet and unnoticed as the hum of the fluorescent lights in the hallway. Mr. Henderson, the school janitor, walked slowly across the yard, his limp more pronounced in the snow. He carried a bucket and a mop, but his eyes were not on the ground. They were fixed on Kilo. He stopped about 10 feet away, his expression unreadable. The shouting died down for a moment, the adults turning to look at the janitor, annoyed by the interruption. "Mr. Henderson, this is not a good time," Principal Thompson said dismissively. But Mr. Henderson didn't seem to hear him. He was looking at the small, worn medal on Kilo's collar. He squinted, his head tilted. He took another slow step forward. Kilo, sensing no threat from the quiet man, merely turned his head slightly, his amber eyes meeting the janitor's. A silent communication seemed to pass between them. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat. His voice, usually soft and raspy, cut through the tense air with an unexpected authority that made everyone fall silent. "Hold on a minute, he said. He pointed a calloused finger not at the dog, but at the medal. "That badge," he said, his voice growing stronger. "Let me see that badge." Mr. Davies scoffed. "What are you talking about? It's a stray dog, a menace." "No," Mr. Henderson said, his gaze unwavering. "It's not." He took another step, his eyes locked on the faint etching on the metal. The world seemed to hold its breath. Even the snowflakes paused. "Badge number," he murmured to himself, then louder, for everyone to hear. "Badge number 3679. He looked up, his gaze sweeping over the stunned faces of the teachers, the principal, and the furious parents. "That's not just any dog," he announced, his voice ringing with the conviction of absolute truth. "That's Kilo, Police K9, badge number 3679, Baltimore PD." The revelation hung in the air, a shocking, impossible truth that shattered the narrative of a vicious stray. Principal Thompson's jaw dropped. Mrs. Davison gasped. Mr. Henderson's eyes found Lily, still huddled on the ground. "He saved my partner's life back in 2015, he continued, his voice thick with emotion. "Took a knife to the shoulder meant for Officer Riley. Tracked a kidnapper for 36 hours through a swamp. Found more missing kids than I can count. That dog is a decorated hero." Silence. A profound, echoing silence descended upon the schoolyard, broken only by the soft hiss of the falling snow. The word hero changed everything. The fear in the teacher's eyes melted away, replaced by a wave of stunned awe. They were no longer looking at a dangerous animal. They were looking at a legend. Mr. and Mrs. Davies stood frozen, their outrage deflating like a punctured balloon. Their accusations, so loud and righteous moments before, now sounded hollow and foolish in the face of this new reality. They looked from the steadfast dog to their son, and for the first time, a flicker of doubt, of shame, crossed their faces. Mark, Kevin, and Derek stared at their slush-covered shoes, the weight of their lies and their cruelty suddenly immense. They had not been attacked by a monster. They had been stopped by an officer of the law. They had been tormenting the companion of a hero. And in the center of it all was Lily. As Mr. Henderson spoke, she felt something shift inside her. The fear, the shame, the crushing weight of her own invisibility began to recede. She looked at Kilo, her shadow, and saw him through their eyes now, not just as her silent friend, but as a warrior, a protector whose worth was undeniable. Slowly she got to her feet, brushing the snow from her red coat. She walked to Kilo's side and wrapped her small arms around his powerful neck, burying her face in his thick fur. Kilo leaned into her, his body finally relaxing, a soft whine escaping his throat. For the first time all day, Lily Peterson was not invisible. She was standing in the protective embrace of a hero, and under the stunned gaze of the entire school, she was finally truly seen. The silence in the hallways of Northwood Elementary the next day was a different kind of quiet. It was not the empty, echoing silence of a school after hours, but a thick, humming quiet, filled with unspoken thoughts. The whispers that followed Lily Peterson were no longer sharp and cruel. They were soft, filled with a mixture of curiosity and a newfound, almost reverent respect. She was no longer the voiceless ghost. She was Lily, the girl with the hero for a shadow. Kilo's story had become schoolyard legend overnight, passed from classroom to classroom, embellished with every telling. He was the dog who had faced down bank robbers, the dog who had found lost children in the woods, the dog who had stared into the face of danger and never flinched. And he belonged to Lily. That afternoon, Principal Thompson's voice came over the intercom, not with the usual monotone drone of announcements, but with a warmth and gravity that made every student sit up a little straighter. He requested that all students and faculty report to the gymnasium for a special assembly. A nervous energy rippled through the school. As Lily walked toward the gym, her classmates parted for her, not out of fear, but out of a strange deference. A few even offered her small, hesitant smiles, which she returned with a shy dip of her head. She could feel Kilo's presence beside her, though he was at home waiting. His courage had somehow become a part of her, a shield she now carried inside. The gymnasium was packed, the polished floor reflecting the harsh overhead lights. The bleachers were a sea of restless children and watchful teachers. Principal Thompson stood at a podium on the stage, his expression serious. Beside the podium was a single empty chair and a microphone stand adjusted to the height of a child. When he called her name, Lily Peterson, a hush fell over the crowd. Every eye turned to her. For a moment, the old fear seized her, a cold hand gripping her heart, threatening to steal her breath. Her legs felt like lead. She wanted to shrink, to disappear into the floorboards. Then she felt a gentle nudge at her back. It was Mr. Henderson, the janitor, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners. He didn't speak, but his look said everything. "You can do this." Beside him, another figure emerged from a side door, and a collective gasp went through the gymnasium. It was Kilo. Principal Thompson had arranged for him to be there. He walked with the calm, steady gait of a seasoned veteran, his tail giving a slow, confident wag. He wore his old police vest, the worn leather a testament to his years of service, and the faded medal on his collar caught the light. He padded directly to Lily's side and sat, looking up at her with those intelligent amber eyes as if to say, "I am here. We will do this together." That was all she needed. Drawing a shaky breath, Lily walked toward the stage, Kilo trotting faithfully beside her. The sound of his claws clicking softly on the floor was the only sound in the cavernous room. She climbed the short steps to the stage, her small hand finding the cold metal of the microphone stand. She looked out at the hundreds of faces staring back at her. In the front row, she saw Mark, Kevin, and Derek. They were sitting with their parents, their heads bowed, their faces pale. They wouldn't meet her eyes. Lily gripped the microphone, her knuckles white. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. She opened her mouth, but only a squeak came out. A few nervous titters rippled through the younger students, but they were quickly shushed. Lily closed her eyes, took another breath, and felt the warm, solid weight of Kilo leaning against her leg. She wasn't the voiceless ghost. She was Lily. And this was her story to tell. My dog's name is Kilo," she began, her voice a fragile whisper that was nonetheless carried by the microphone to every corner of the room. "Before he came to live with me, he was a police officer. Mr. Henderson knew him. He was very brave. He saved a lot of people." She paused, her gaze sweeping over the audience. "He's my best friend. He always knows when I'm sad, or when I'm scared." She glanced down at Kilo, who looked up at her, his ear twitching. A small, genuine smile touched her lips, and when she looked back up, her voice was a little stronger, a little clearer. "For a long time," she continued, "I was scared to come to school. I felt small and quiet, like nobody could see me. And when people did see me, they weren't very nice." She didn't look at Mark, But the weight of her words landed on him anyway. She could see his shoulders slump even further. It's hard to be brave when you feel like you're all alone. It makes your voice get stuck in your throat. She took another breath, this one deeper, fuller. The fear was still there, a faint tremor in her hands, but it was no longer in control. "Yesterday," she said, her voice now ringing with a newfound clarity, "when I was on the ground and I was crying, I felt more alone than ever. But then Kilo came. He didn't have to bark. He didn't have to bite. He just stood there. He stood between me and the people who were hurting me. He wasn't afraid. And when I saw him, I wasn't as afraid anymore." She looked directly into the crowd, her eyes finding those of other quiet children, the ones who always sat in the back, the ones who ate lunch by themselves. She was speaking to them now. "My friend Kilo is a hero because of all the lives he saved as a police dog. But he's my hero because he taught me something important." She placed her free hand on Kilo's head, stroking his scarred ear. Her voice, no longer trembling, resonated through the gymnasium, carrying a simple, profound truth that brought tears to the eyes of teachers and parents alike. "He taught me that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about not staying silent when you are. It's about not having to be alone in it." For a heartbeat, there was absolute silence. And then, a single person began to clap. It was Mr. Henderson. Then another, and another, until the entire gymnasium erupted in a thunderous standing ovation. The sound washed over Lily not as noise, but as a wave of warmth, of acceptance, of being seen. She looked down, tears blurring her vision, and saw Kilo's tail thumping a steady, proud rhythm against the stage floor. When the applause finally subsided, Principal Thompson stepped back to the podium, his own eyes glistening. "Thank you, Lily," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You and Kilo have reminded us all what true strength and community look like." He cleared his throat and addressed the school. Effective immediately, Northwood Elementary is launching a new anti-bullying initiative, the Kilo Kindness Program. And I am proud to announce that Kilo has accepted the honorary position of our school's official comfort officer. He smiled. He will be visiting us regularly, not as a guard, but as a friend. A reminder that we are all responsible for protecting each other. In the weeks that followed, the atmosphere at Northwood Elementary transformed. Kilo's visits were the highlight of everyone's week. He would lie patiently in the library while children read to him, his presence a calming balm. He would sit in on classroom discussions about empathy, a living symbol of loyalty and protection. Lily, no longer a ghost, blossomed. She joined the art club. She raised her hand in class. She laughed with new friends in the cafeteria, her voice clear and bright. The change wasn't just in her. It was in everyone. The older kids started looking out for the younger ones. Acts of kindness once rare became commonplace. Mark, Kevin, and Derek were assigned to help Mr. Henderson with his duties after school for 2 months. It was during those long afternoons of sweeping floors and cleaning windows that they began a slow, difficult journey of understanding. One day, while cleaning out a dusty storage closet, Mark found an old framed photograph of a younger Mr. Henderson in his police uniform, standing beside a proud, unscarred Kilo. "He really was a hero, wasn't he?" Mark asked quietly, his voice devoid of its usual arrogance. Mr. Henderson stopped polishing a window and looked at the boy. "He is, son," he replied softly, "but so is that little girl. It takes one kind of courage to run into a dangerous building. It takes another kind to stand up on a stage and show everyone your scars." That evening, Lily sat on her front porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Kilo rested beside her, his head in her lap. She was gently mending her small stitched puppy toy, which her mother had carefully washed and dried. The stitches were a little clumsy, but they were strong. They were hers. She had found her voice not in a shout, but in a steady, quiet truth. Kilo, the decorated K-9 officer, had faced down armed criminals and sniffed out hidden dangers. He had served his city with distinction, but here, in the quiet twilight, protecting the heart of a little girl and helping her mend what was broken, he had found his final and most profound mission. He had shown an entire community that the greatest heroes are not always the ones who make the most noise. but the ones who teach us how to hear the quietest voices.